Hi guys, this said it was just put up an hour ago, so let me get it started. They may have
Good Tuesday
updates.
afternoon. We are another day closer from the potential landfall of a major hurricane across the southeastern coast of the United States. And that hurricane is Florence, Category 4 system at the current hour, September 11th. 2018. Here's the latest of what's going on in the tropics. Florence not alone. We have Isaac, a tropical storm, and Hurricane Helene, which as of the current update is 11 a.m., which is a Category 2 hurricane. The latest information on Florence, which will be the one threatening the United States in the short term. The storm underwent something called an eyewall replacement cycle, and this is a symptom of the system being so strong. Very, very common in Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes, and we'll explain what that means in just a minute. Landfall location still uncertain, but it is pointing to the North Carolina coastline, particularly somewhere in the vicinity of Wilmington, North Carolina. The timing of impact looks to be late Thursday, and with it stalling out in interior North Carolina, these effects are going to be right through the upcoming weekend, if not a little bit longer. Now, there is good model agreement for a Harvey-like stalling scenario, which would mean catastrophic freshwater flooding. And with it running up against the mountains, that introduces orographic lift, and that intensifies the rain along the Appalachian Mountain chain. So now we're up to 4 states now that have declared states of emergency. We've added Maryland to that list, so all the way down to South Carolina, and mandatory evacuations have already been ordered through a lot of coastal communities there. Here's the 11 a.m. advisory straight from the National Hurricane Center. A Category 4 hurricane, winds of 130 miles per hour. The overall track has not changed very much, but the official reading from the Hurricane Center puts that median line right up to the north and east of Wilmington, making landfall somewhere around Morehead City. I think the most likely area to see an impact, again, this is very changeable, is going to be that area in red, stretching all the way down into the northern areas of South Carolina, all the way up through Cape Fear and nearly at Cape Hatteras in North Carolina, for this to shift possibly in the short term here as we get closer and closer. Again, this isn't set in stone by any means. Here's the satellite presentation, a very healthy looking system still. It's now been a Category 4 hurricane, major hurricane, for over 24 hours now, and it certainly has the presentation of it. Winds at 130, and that makes it the low end Category 4. Has to climb another 16 miles per hour in its sustained winds to achieve Category 5 status, which is a possibility as we go into the next 48 hours, as it is traversing a very warm Atlantic Ocean. Here's another look at the updated imagery on the satellites. I want to zoom in here and show you exactly what happened in the last 12 to 24 hours. It underwent 2 eyewall replacement cycles. You can kind of see how that very well-defined eye gets clouded up. That eyewall gets so intense that it constricts around it and eventually puts it on a chokehold to the system, and a new, larger eyewall moves in to replace it. So during that time frame, we typically see some brief weakening before that new eyewall emerges, which it has, and it gets a little bit stronger. You can even see the convection around that new eyewall a little bit more intense with the darker reds and browns there. That's indicating colder cloud tops, meaning they are higher and more vertically developed, very healthier and completely encompassing, symmetrical around that big eye there. Now, the average storm size, you remember yesterday's video, was around 260 miles in diameter. It certainly has expanded, over 380 miles wide now. The average storm size, so this puts it right in that range, 350 to 450 miles. And guess what? Look what's just off to the west here. Developing area of convection that's trying to organize. This is Invest 95L, 60% chance of development here into what would be named Joyce as it moves north, northwest into the Gulf of Mexico. Could this have an overall effect on the upper level steering as Florence approaches the southeast coastline? Yet to be seen, but certainly something to take into account. Hurricane hunters have been flying 12-hour shifts, or 12-hour missions, I should say, into the system, Florence, and they're flying out of Savannah, Georgia now. They were based most recently in Bermuda, but now out of Savannah. Here's the most recent run indicating some surface winds there as it was flying out of the storm at 60 miles per hour. And the central pressure has risen a little bit, probably from the eyewall replacement cycle, 951 millibar. Overnight last night it was down to 940s. So it's overall about 850 miles at storm center from the potential landfall location, somewhere around Wilmington in North Carolina. Of course, that is subject to change here, either to the northeast or to the south and west as we get a little bit closer, and the overall setup is kind of set in stone. So the overall track right now is not. It is changeable. It is traversing very warm ocean waters. In fact, 85, 86-degree water temperatures, and this extends down to a great depth. When you get a very intense hurricane like this, you get something called upwelling. It mixes up the ocean with the high surf, And usually, if the ocean heat content is not to a far depth, it mixes up some cooler water to the surface, and that'll essentially kind of choke it and not have enough energy for it to sustain itself. But with these very warm pools here, that's not looking likely, maintaining category 4, if not category 5, at some point in time as it moves over 700 miles of open ocean. There's a closer look of the forecast landfall here right around Wilmington. Category 3 at that point. That is a little bit of a change from the advisory as of 5 a.m. this morning, which made it at a category 4, but that was at 1:30. Now it's down to 1:20, so not a huge improvement by any means. This would mean storm surge would be the biggest issue on the northeastern quadrant of the storm and the eastern side, and that would bring a lot of water up and over the low-lying areas of the Outer Banks. When I mean that the track is uncertain, this is why. This is the spaghetti plots here. So each line that you're seeing kind of scribbled all over the place is a different computer model or a different member of a model, an ensemble. These are all over the place here through much of the coast of North Carolina, and they're all also starting to indicate something interesting, that they get to a certain latitude, stop, stall, and then kind of move backwards, retrograde, and then track westwards inland. I'm going to talk about the reasoning with that when we show you some of the ensemble members here from the GFS in a little bit. Hurricane watches have been added to the advisory and watch warning list here, pretty much from the North Carolina-Virginia state border. In fact, it is impacting parts of Virginia Beach all the way south to Charleston, South Carolina. Those hurricane watches are up, and farther inland in Raleigh area, a tropical storm watch. In fact, it's the first time ever that the Raleigh Forecast Office has issued a tropical storm watch for interior areas of North Carolina there. All right, what's the difference between a watch and a warning? Well, a watch obviously is a little bit farther out in time. Within 48 hours, that means the risk of hurricane conditions is possible within that time frame of 74-mile-per-hour winds or greater. A warning is a little more imminent. It means that hurricane conditions are either happening right now, they're imminent, or likely within the next 36 hours. Let's talk about the threats now. As we get towards a landfall of a major hurricane, there are several different threats that may impact the area. Storm surge, inundation, the greatest threat to life and property, and that you need to understand how this works. This is when wind is blowing onshore from a developing hurricane that's moving onshore. On the eastern and northeastern quadrant where you find the strongest winds. Coming up and over, it's blowing the water up towards the coastline, and eventually it piles up and over land, especially at lower sea levels, and piles up and eventually can grow, depending on the strength of the wind, to a meter or two, or up to 12 feet in some spots. But that is not expected, thankfully, in a lot of our areas that may see some storm surge still. Nonetheless, 3 to 5 to 6 feet of storm surge possible through a good chunk of the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and then far eastern North Carolina as well. This is a model here that depicts the possibility of storm surge based on the forecast model track, and you notice there are a lot of yellows and a lot of oranges there that indicate 3 to 6 foot storm surge. In fact, let's look closer here to a possible landfall location of Morehead City, and notice here now towards Atlantic and Harker's Island. I mean, 3 to 6 to 7, 8 foot storm surge can't be ruled out there, again, depending on the exact track. Also, another area we'll look towards is Wilmington. Notice here you're seeing some oranges as well right along the immediate coastline. Next up is going to be the threat of winds, obviously. We have tropical storm force winds, which are 39 miles per hour or stronger, and then hurricane force, which is 74 miles per hour or stronger there. That'll lead to widespread power outages and tree and structure damage, and that could be out and losing power for days, if not a little bit longer. Here's a look at some of the forecast winds. We're going to go off the European model here that indicates a landfall somewhere around Wilmington, North Carolina, and look at some of these numbers here. Again, just before landfall, we're seeing over 100 mile per hour sustained winds. It gets even higher than that, 129 miles per hour there. Again, you'll find the strongest winds probably within a swath of 20 miles in diameter from the center there, and the strongest will always be on the northeastern quadrant because it takes into account the forward motion of the storm as well. Those strong winds over tropical storm force extend well into North Carolina and even passing the border into Virginia and down south into South Carolina, with winds gusting here over 90 miles per hour through Virginia Beach. Again, this is a model's rendition of what may happen here. This is not set in stone and will likely change. Notice how it moves inland, stalls, and then slowly sputters off towards the west through South Carolina here, bringing a lot of issues in terms of rainfall. Let's talk about that next, freshwater flooding, because the initial flood threat is going to be from the storm surge as the storm moves onshore. Once it's over land, this will occur post-landfall. We'll see that system drop 20 to 30 inches of rainfall. And with the added impact of it moving up against the mountainous region of the Appalachians, orographic lift becomes an issue, and we see those numbers possibly go even higher locally, so that's going to be a big problem. Here's a look at some of the models in terms of how much rainfall they are expecting. You can kind of see the differences in the models. This is the GFS indicating a wide swath here, 15 to 30 inches of rainfall. On the contrary, you look at the European, that keeps the storm track suppressed a little bit farther to the south, keeping that swath of the heaviest rain through much of central North Carolina and south into South Carolina. Still a good amount of rain, nothing to kind of shrug off here through Virginia. 5 to 10 inches there could certainly still cause some flooding issues. So here's a look at the GFS ensembles. Again, this is one model run several different times, and we talked about how it was moving towards a latitude, almost stopping in its tracks, retrograding, and then building back westwards. Well, why is that? There's a very strong area of high pressure off to the north and northeast of there. Think of it as two magnets repelling each other, okay? As Florence tries to build north, it's running into that big, strong high pressure, essentially bringing it to a halt and then stalling it and eventually pushing it back inland. So really going to depend on how strong that ridge is, the exact area in which it's located, where this stop and its eventual forward momentum begins and where it ends as it pushes inland, because that's going to be the all-determining factor here in the coming days. Now, also in the tropics, we talked about we still have Isaac, which is a tropical storm expected to strengthen back to a Category 1 hurricane as it moves towards the windwards and then enters the Caribbean Sea later on this week. And then we have Helene as well, no threat to any land masses, recurving north, but a Category 2 hurricane at the moment. All right, that's all we got. A lot of information there, but of course, if you are along the coastline of South, North Carolina, as well as Virginia, prepare for the impact of a major hurricane here in the next 48 hours. If you have any questions, feel free to always find me on social media, meteorologist Tim Pandages, or on Twitter on 13 Tim Pandages. Enjoy your afternoon and prepare.
All right, guys, that's all we got for right now. That was put up an hour ago for the 1 o'clock. It's 2:29 now. God bless. Be safe. Thank you for watching. Remember, keep eyes and ears open, and definitely listen to your local news stations.